Welcome back to Following Noadon, a Stormlight podcast. This week is episode 83, and we're talking about chapters 101 through 105 of Oathbringer by Brandon Sanderson. This is officially longer than Words of Radiance and The Way of Kings. Once we hit chapter 105, that's where Words of Radiance leaves off, if I'm not wrong. And The Way of Kings doesn't even get to chapter 100, so we're into the late game, as they say, for Oathbringer. How are you, Eliot?
Good. I'm very, very excited about this episode for a completely random and slightly arbitrary reason that we're going to get to soon.
I understand. How are you, Paul?
I am amazing. I've got my little Christmas antlers on. I don't know which reindeer I am. I'll have to take the reindeer quiz or something to determine whichever one is a windrunner, I guess.
Dasher.
So, yeah, I think so. Or Comet. Comet's probably a Skybreaker.
Probably.
So I'm really excited to talk about this. Really excited to go in. I'm super excited. We see Noadon again. That's really exciting. So I'm looking forward to talking about that with you guys.
Who's on our mug?
Oh, our mug. So, kind of a unique week here. This week we have Steven. Steven's on our mug, and this is Steven from before, if you remember, our loyal fans who are here each week. Steven, before I said he was
Don't mess this up.
Ardent, right? I said he was an Ardent. He was a surgeon. Everyone laughed at me, right? Everyone was like, "Oh my gosh, Paul never knows what tier our patrons are." Well, joke's on you, everyone, because now Steven is an Ardent. He upped his tier, and so I was just right all along. So I think we should, correct that. I don't know if we still have like a count going on for how accurate I am, but
no, Steven
is now an Ardent.
Steven's just covering for you is what's happening here. He said you said he was an Ardent. He's like, yeah, I should be an Ardent, and then increase his tier.
See, but if we went back and re-looked at that video, and I was like, Steven's an Ardent. I'm no longer wrong. I'm just not wrong anymore. So I would like to say a big thank you to Steven, not only for supporting us, which we really highly appreciate, but also for really helping me out with my mistakes and things, which is no longer a mistake now, thanks to you.
Thank you, Steven.
Thank you, Steven.
So we really appreciate it. And so the mug, it's got a little H on there, a little H logo, and that is actually, it's just a logo for where I work, Highland Church. So there we go.
Nice.
No music this week. I've had several music related ones, like last week, and then I had like a piano one. So this week, no music.
2 words for this episode?
Mine are journey and confidence.
Okay, I thought you were going to take the low-hanging fruit there, but all right. No. Journey and confidence, is that what you said?
Mm-hmm.
All right. Eliot?
So this is going to be an interesting week. I could have picked words relating to Dalinar and some of the revelations we get about him. I could have picked words relating to Noadon, the namesake for our podcast, but instead, I'm going to pick words relating to the one thing that I got completely distracted by and probably spent more time researching than I did actually reading these chapters. My 2 words for this episode are the painting.
All right.
Ooh.
Let's use these 4 words and talk about Oathbringer.
Oh, man.
All right. So when I saw your part of the outline, Elliot, where you say I recognize this painting, and I believe it's 9 exclamation marks next to it, I put a snip of that in our inner circle Discord for our patrons to look at because I just thought it was so funny. I've been sharing some of our outlines with them for our early content stuff for them, so I just really appreciated that. So go ahead and talk about the painting.
So I got to talk about this. I'll talk about it more when we see it in the chapter here, but in chapter
102.
102, there's another one of these classic Brandon Sanderson throwaway moments where if you're reading it and you're not paying attention, you're going to blow right past it. But I was paying attention. Actually, first time, it just kind of stood out to me the first time. I was like, oh, that seems vaguely familiar and odd. I'll have to pay more attention next time. And then when I came back through taking my notes, I paused, set down the book, had to go do some research because the painting that Kaladin sees completely randomly in the marketplace of this city in Shadesmar is the painting that Lightsong sees in Warbreaker and spends like a bunch of time analyzing. Yeah, I'll break it down for when we get to the chapter, but OMG, my head about exploded.
We will
This is going to be a good episode.
Yeah, we will certainly talk about it more.
This is going to be a really good episode.
Go ahead, Paul.
Well, whenever I heard Elliot's words, the painting, I don't even know what my words are anymore. I'm just invested in that. Let me go find my notes.
You're invested?
Yes, I am very invested. I'm like a 4th heightening right now or something. Anyways, my words are journey and confidence. Journey is a commonly used word in our archives regarding Stormlight. And, journey before destination, right? But I'm going to take it out of that context a little bit and mostly talk about our flashback Dalinar chapters. We've really seen a lot. So we've had a good amount of variety in our different characters' flashbacks, right? If we go look at Kaladin's ones, back in the Way of Kings, it does show like a strict like journey progression, like where we see him grow as a child and then kind of his early like dealings in the military, all this stuff. In Shallan's book, Words of Radiance, we see less of like a journey, like embarking on a journey or a quest or something, and more of like I don't know what you'd call it. It's almost like a drama or horror film, and maybe a better term for it. It's very like scary and dark and things. In this one, in Dalinar's book, Oathbringer, it's different once again, where it's almost feeling like it's half and half. It feels like we kind of see like a political drama almost, or maybe like I don't know, a raunchy like I don't know what to call it. There's a lot of drunkenness, a lot of like craziness, heartbreak and broken relationships, and then tragedy, and then now we're kind of seeing him embark on a quest or a journey. I'm very excited for this. I feel like this is the part we've been waiting for as far as Dalinar's character development for what we know about him. And so that's mostly where Journey comes from, is we kind of see his plans laid out, and I assume we're about to learn a lot, or see what actually happens.
Sounds good.
I have another word.
That's not allowed.
Confidence.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
No. One of my two. That was my first of 2 words. Confidence. Actually, it largely goes to Navani. Big shout out to Navani in 104. Honestly, if I wanted to be immature about it, chapter 104 is when I would be like, does this really matter? And it very much matters. But I was almost a little bored reading it, just being honest. Like, nothing super exciting. But Navani really stands up for Dalinar. But there's also like a good bit of doubt that we see a little bit behind the scenes of Navani is sticking her neck out hard to defend Dalinar. but she's almost wondering, like, is he going to, like, make a recovery? Because he's kind of just a drunkard right now. But she does have the confidence not only to step out and stick her neck out there for Dalinar in the defense of him and their kingdom, but also the confidence in Dalinar to make this recovery and be everything that she's saying he's going to be.
Absolutely.
Those
I
are the main reasons for my words.
100% agree. All right. Chapter 101. And before we even talk about Chapter 101, let's talk about the epigraph for Chapter 101.
This could be such a good one.
We'll tie the epigraphs for 101, 2, 3, and 4, all, or actually not 4, 1, 2, and 3 together. And Elliot, I know you want to talk about this, but I'll go ahead and read them, and then we can talk about them. So this is for the epigraphs for 101, 102, and 103. Moalak is very similar to Nergaul, though instead of inspiring battle rage, he supposedly granted visions of the future. In this lore and theology align. Seeing the future originates from the unmade and is of the enemy. Moalak was said to grant visions of the future at different times, but most commonly at the transition point between realms, when a soul was nearing the Tranquiline Halls. Many cultures speak of the so-called death rattles that sometimes overtake people as they die. Tradition ascribes them to the Almighty, but I find too many of them to be seemingly prophetic. This will be my most contentious assertion, I am sure, but I think these are the effects of Moalak persisting in our current time. Proof is easy to provide. The effect is regionalized and tends to move across Roshar. This is the roving of the unmade.
Yet again, like we talked about last time, we're getting some really clear, direct information out of the epigraphs, which I'm almost like uncomfortable about this at this point, because up until now, our epigraphs have been pretty consistently vague, not very helpful. There were entire parts of books I just almost didn't even read the epigraphs because they were so out of context. And now here we get very specific. Oh yeah, and death rattles caused by Moalak, who's an unmade and roams the world. Wow, that was incredibly helpful.
Well, and some of those epigraphs that are seemingly don't mean anything are back in the Way of Kings, and they're the death rattles that are prophetic. So anytime you'd like, you can go pick up your Way of Kings and listen to those and try to figure out what those are talking about now.
Yep. So yeah, not too much more to talk about there, aside from we're getting some really good, useful information here. We can start to put some names to what's going on. We know Taravangian is collecting these death rattles, so he's going to be, trying to figure out where Moalak is, follow him around, collect those. We're starting to again understand a little bit more about what's going on here.
Yet another reference to when I asked how many unmade have we seen on screen, back when I asked that, and there's another one.
Me and Elliot's lives just flashed before our eyes at that very moment.
All right, into the actual content of 101 here. We have an Adolin point of view chapter, and it's talking about, or it's on the ship, and they're approaching Celebrant. They are coming into our first city that we've seen in Shadesmar. And I kind of want to take a step back before we talk about the details in this chapter. What were your guys' impressions of Shadesmar, and how has that changed now that we're into part 4 here? Like, everybody has their preconceived notions through the first 2 books of how Shadesmar kind of is, and then we actually spend time here into part 4 of Oathbringer. How has that changed? Do you like it? Do you not like it? Is this a waste of time for you guys? Are you enjoying your time in Shadesmar? What are our thoughts?
It's definitely turning out to not be what I expected. I did not expect the structured culture and the developed cities. I think there was a moment where Syl or somebody mentioned like a long time back, oh yeah, Spren live in cities or something like that, just kind of offhand. But I never really thought about, what does that actually look like? And our brief glimpses we got of Shadesmar of just a weird backward sun and a sea of beads kind of made me think it was just this kind of dark land where not a whole lot happens. But that's turning out to not be the case at all. There's trade, there's lighthouses, there's you name it. There's all kinds of stuff going on. Politics, all kinds of interesting things going on here in this whole separate world. I didn't have any idea.
In fact, I still think this myself, but I always imagine Celebrant, the city that they show up to in this episode, of being extremely flat. Like the entirety of Shadesmar is extremely sea level. Like it's a sea, like the whole thing is a sea, and then when you get to a city, it's like, a couple feet above the bead level, and then the whole thing is just like 2-dimensional. Shadesmar is 2-dimensional. That's it in my head. That's what I envision. Do you guys have the same impression of there's no elevation gain or depression in Shadesmar?
Yeah, pretty much. I never think of like a significance like to landscapes or even like weather, right? Like
Right.
things like that. It's just always like, I don't know, 80 degrees and dark-ish, but like light at the same time. I don't know. Yeah,
Yeah,
and
that
I've
about
always
sums up.
imagined it completely flat and still also like I just imagine it's just beads. There's no like waves or things like that. It's just plain.
Do you remember the scene from one of the Pirates of the Caribbean movies where Captain Jack Sparrow's in Davy Jones' locker and he's like licking rocks, weird stuff? That's
Yes.
kind of what I imagine Shadesmar as, a darker version of that for some reason.
I'm
Also,
also
there's crabs in that scene. Maybe he was in Roshar.
Ooh.
Wow, that would make sense. I think we can connect those dots actually.
And what's her
What was
face
their
that
magic system?
Yeah.
explodes into all those crabs? She's a sleepless. Yeah, this is
Oh,
Yeah,
yeah.
yep.
Yeah.
that's the first, screen adaptation of
There we go.
Brandon Sanderson's writing. Yeah, very cool. Glad we cracked that one. Also, just something that I've been thinking about is, since this isn't a like visual adaptation, I don't know, but there's probably like art made of Shadesmore or something, but I bet a lot of people have different like imaginations of Shadesmore, and
100%.
that's one thing I'd be really curious if you are listening or watching. Definitely comment or in our Discord. Let us know like how you have envisioned Shadesmar, because that's something I'm actually really curious to see. Because honestly, I think I have a really bland imagination. Like my imagination was just plain. Like even if you get off of like the bead C, it doesn't even go up at all. Like it's like the edge of the McDonald's like ball pit. Like I don't know, like the McDonald's the playpen ball pit. Like there's nothing special and stuff. So
You okay over there, Elliot?
That was close. I took a drink right before you said that. That was dangerous.
yeah,
That
that's
was
the first
dangerous.
time I've seen you like bend over. That was funny. But yeah. So really curious to know like how other people who are way more imaginative than me
I always
have seen it.
I always picture it of the Twilight levels in Legend of Zelda, where you become a wolf and there's everything's kind of
Yeah.
brown
Yeah,
and
and
yeah, that's what I
and
picture.
as a kid you'd be really scared. Like those are
Yeah,
kind of scary. I playing that as a
and you
kid.
go
Yeah.
back and replay it, and you're just annoyed at those levels now.
Yeah,
You're like,
like
I don't want to do
I
this.
have to fight these bugs so I can go back to playing the actual game.
Yeah.
What a pain.
Let's talk about Azure. We haven't talked about Azure for a little bit, and she has some interesting dialogue with Adolin in this chapter. Elliot, do you want to talk about this? I see your eyes glinting over there. It's not just your glasses.
Not just the reflection of my computer screen in my glasses. Yes. I do want to talk about this. There's an interesting discussion here between Azure and it's Adolin, right?
Yep.
They're just kind of chatting. And Adolin has this interesting scene where he like goes and tailors himself some new clothes because he apparently can't go a week without a new set of clothes. So there's that. And then Azure is like kind of commenting like that's kind of strange. Like royals don't usually, don't usually they don't usually know how to do that. And Adolin's like, well, how many royals have you known? And then she kind of like, well, actually, and spins off into this interesting discussion where she's like, well, actually, I have been around royals, and actually, I do have experience with that. And actually, it didn't go so well for me. And she even ends up like talking further, and you realize that she's talking about herself, it seems like. And she talks about how she's had experience with a throne and how she walked away from it and how there was family involved and how she felt like she's shirking her responsibilities. And this whole time, as she's talking through this, I'm thinking, you're describing the plot of Warbreaker. You're describing what we saw happen with Ciri and Vivenna in Warbreaker. Is Azure one of those characters? Paul, help me here.
I don't think you want me to help you here.
I
Because she's
do.
Light Song. It's obvious.
No,
It's so
Shallan.
obvious.
No, Shallan is Light Song.
No. I'm kidding. I'm kidding. I'm sorry. I just wanted to cause chaos. We can move on.
I really do. I'm now leaning pretty heavily in the direction of last episode. I talked about how I'm now fully convinced that Zyle is Vasher. I think our heroes might be hanging out with the Venna. I think that what she's talking about here, fits with Vivenna's character that we saw in Warbreaker. Spoilers for Warbreaker, by the way. Go back and read that book if you hadn't. Just it's way too late now, but throwing that out there. At the end of that book, at the end of Warbreaker, we get this vibe of like Vivenna and Vasher are gonna like go off and have adventures. Have they done that? Have they gone off and had adventures and somehow they're separated and Vasher is now on Roshar and Azure just showed up and she's looking for him? They're trying to reunite or something like that. These are all the lanes my mind is going down now because there's some evidence, I think, pointing towards this.
Assuming she is Vivenna, who is she looking for? She says she's looking for a criminal, and that's why she's here. Who's the criminal? Is it Vasher or presumably Zyle?
For stealing Nightblood.
Ooh, is it Nail? Is it Nightblood?
Is it now Zeth? Because he has Nail, or has Nightblood? Who knows? What if Azure and Zeth fought, just for fun?
I think
it's not going to go well for Azure.
I was going to say I think Azure would lose.
Yeah, probably so. Cool.
To answer your question, Trevor, I think the criminal is Vasher. I think she's saying that like sort of facetiously or almost endearingly, like, "Oh yeah, my criminal Vasher,"
Okay.
my companion. I don't know that she's necessarily like trying to track down a criminal like she's law enforcement.
Right.
I almost wonder if she's like, "Oh yeah, that old criminal Vasher," is kind of how I'm interpreting that. Maybe I'm taking a little too much license there.
No, that's fair. Any more comments on Azure?
I've already had my eye on her. Now I'm gonna have my eye even closer on her because I really want some proof to say this is confirmed. Because we're still a ways away from, I think, being sure on this, but there's definitely some evidence here in this segment.
And her hair has changed before
We
this.
have
So,
seen that. Yep.
all right. Adolin and Captain Eco have a conversation, and Captain Eco's father is locked away in the prison cell of the ship. Why?
Because he used to be a radiant spren, right? That was the explanation there.
Right. So on Roshar, Captain Eco's dad is a dead Shardblade, and if he doesn't keep him locked in his ship, he's going to go wander to the equivalent mirror spot of his Shardblade, and he's going to walk around there, and he doesn't want him to do that. So he's going to keep him locked up in his ship and sail around with him.
That is so odd. Like, think about that in like physical realm terms. Like, oh yeah, like my dad is like in my basement and he's deceased because if I let him out, he will float around in the sky
Wander off.
following the being where like I don't know, the sword that equates to him in another realm. He will follow that around endlessly, and I don't want him to do that. Therefore, he is in my basement. And they're like, okay, cool. Like,
Yep.
sounds good.
Oh yeah, sure.
Moving on.
Yeah, I've got my dad there. Like, my mom's in the cupboard. I don't know. Like,
I have two quick thoughts on this. First off, I had assumed that objects in the physical realm and their associated spren would always be in the same place, if that makes sense.
Right.
Like, if you were to travel, if you were to stand at one point and travel back and forth between physical and Shadesmar, in the physical, you'd see a shard blade, and in Shadesmar, you'd see the dead spren. Or in the physical, you'd see a stick, and in Shadesmar, you'd see a sphere, which is the soul of the stick or whatever it is. And maybe I'm crossing lines here with the spread and whatnot, but this shows that that's, at least in this case, not the case. Eco is intentionally separating his father, the spren part, from the actual blade. So the blade could be on the whole other side of Roshar, and the spren guys with them on the ship. I don't know if that's important, but it kind of broke my assumptions of how things worked in Shadesmar a little bit.
Well, I don't think your assumptions are ill-founded because that's what he's preventing, where
Right.
the sphere or the spren will gravitate to wherever they are in the physical realm, but you can prevent that, and it's not like they're just going to phase through the wall to get there. You can physically prevent that from happening.
So yeah, just interesting physics, I guess, behind Roshar there. Second thing, is this what Syl was like when Kaladin killed her? We've seen two examples of this now. We have the spren that's following Adolin around. That's the spren of his shard blade. And now we see another example of a dead spren. We had that dramatic sequence where Syl was dead. Was she this like kind of mindless walking corpse kind of spren in Shadesmar during that time?
Does it matter that she wasn't a Shardblade yet?
I'm not sure.
okay, I don't. I may have already brought this up. If so, I'm sorry for repeating myself. But are we confident that this sprint is like she's described as very different looking from Shalon, but she is humanoid. And so my thought was, is she just like a dead honor spren? Like, are her and Syl like not that different? Syl is just alive. We don't know what a dead honor spren would look like, I guess, but yeah, I could see that being a very real possibility. I feel like enough things have been I don't know. She's been hanging around for too long that she's got to become relevant in some way. I feel like it would just be okay. I'm gonna recant a little bit. Two things are running through my head. One is our dead our dead eye has been wandering around with us for quite a while in this story, and I imagine will continue to do so until we exit Shadesmar. So that makes me think maybe I don't know, through the power of friendship, she's gonna come alive. My second thought is it's honestly just a good point of showing like what these dead Spren are, like kind of how sad it is that people use dead Spren. I don't know, things like that. There's a lot of significance that can be portrayed by her just being there all the time, in the cognitive realm. So I don't know. Those are like the two ways that I could see the significance of our dead eye being.
As far as what type of spren she is, you've been she has vines kind of for skin, and cord is what it was describing. Where have we seen that before?
Yeah.
In the physical realm, where have we seen that before?
With the like what's the term for it? The soul casters, people soul casting.
Okay, yes. Where else?
Wendell.
Wendell's described as a vine, but he's like not a humanoid vine.
Right. So on the physical side, he's just kind of vines, but on Shadesmar's side, it's a humanoid walking like made of vines. So a
Kinda
lot
like
of
pattern.
this has never been confirmed by the end of Oathbringer, but it was assumed that this Spren was an old Edge Dancer Spren.
I was wondering that actually. That's interesting.
That
And
makes
also
sense.
interesting, Paul, that you mentioned the Soulcaster. I'm going to come back to that in a minute here and talk about Soulcasters a little bit later on. So we'll revisit that.
Great.
You brought up the it being sad that we're using Spren on the physical realm when they're sentient beings that the Knights Radiant killed way back when or whatever. And Captain Eco seems to be fairly pragmatic about it. He's like, they're dead, like they're not using their shard bladeness, so I don't blame you for using it because they're super powerful. But that seems to be not the widespread impression of Spren, where Spren would actually hold that against humans for using those, like Syl has in the past, where Syl doesn't like people for holding shard blades. Do you remember that? And then you can hear, if you're a Knight Radiant, you'll hear screams if you pick up a dead Spren. So, but Captain Eco's not like super hung up on that topic. So
I think we might be approaching another potentially big dilemma. So we had kind of a big reveal at one point when we realized that the Parshmen were being held in that form essentially against their will. And there's a big question of is it ethical to be using Parshmen as slaves? They had been justifying it because they viewed them as, maybe closer to beasts than humans.
right,
They're not intelligent, they can't, talk normally, they don't have feelings. We use them for manual labor. Then there's this huge realization of, oh, crap. Actually, they do have feelings. They're just stuck in these dull forms and they can't interact even though they wish they could. So that brought a whole, ethical dilemma there. I think we might be headed for another ethical dilemma. Is it okay to be using a shard blade when that's the corpse of a person, a sentient being? And you can go even further and say, is it okay to be using fabrials? We've had hints a couple times towards the fact that a fabrial is powered by an imprisoned spren. And we had a scene last episode. We didn't have enough time to talk about it.
right.
But Dalinar was talking with Teravangian, and Teravangian was showing him the half shard shields that the Vadens have invented. And Taravangian says something interesting. He's almost like trying to goad Dalinar with this information. He shares that the spren that they've used to make that shard shield is a high spren, not like the actual like high spren. What's the word I'm looking for? It's
Intelligence spread.
a yeah, it's a not a lesser spren. It's a like sentient spren. So they've taken like a sill, a honor spren, a cultivation spren, and they've imprisoned it in their gem to power this half shard. That is, I'm potentially not okay with that. And I wonder if that's kind of where this story might be leading. Are our characters going to have to face that dilemma in the near future of, are they okay with using fabrials? Are they okay with using shard blades now that they understand better what exactly is happening?
Right. And it's kind of dropped in the middle of the thrill revelation that Dalinar gets,
Yeah.
and so he's like, and conveniently conveniently Brandon Sanderson brings that up right then because
Yep.
it's bringing it up. Dalinar's like, I don't have time to think about this. I'm
Yep.
running, literally running right now. So
tough questions.
just one last thing on 101. Captain Eco calls Adolin out for calling his Deadeye a friend. Captain Eco asks him like, "What is she to you?" And Adolin says, "Oh, she's a friend. Like I talk to her and I interact with her." And Captain Eco's like, "Well, not really. Like I understand that you care for your sword, but she's a tool for you. Don't pretend she's your friend, because if she had her way, she probably wouldn't be with you." All right. We get to Celebrant. A lot of people, they're turning heads as they're walking through Celebrant. They split up, and a lot of people are noticing like, oh, there's people here. That's not normal. And Syl has a light weaving on her, so she's pretending to be person 2. And we get to the painting. Do you want to talk about, they're going through a couple different stalls, picking up, food and clothes and stuff like that they need. And Kaladin notices a painting. Elliot, do you want to talk about it?
I do want to talk about this. So Kaladin notices a painting, and you don't think too much of it. He just kind of looks at it, and then he looks at it a little further, and he thinks he sees the unmade in it. He sees like shadows. It's mostly red. It's got some white. It's got some black in it. And then there's some interesting bits we get from the vendor. The vendor tells us, where is it? Ah, yes. From the far off court of gods, a painting intended only for a divinity to see. It is exceptionally rare that one escapes being burned at the court and makes its way onto the market. And Kaladin kind of asks some questions. And interestingly, I guess I'll mention this. The person mentions that this is a piece by Nenefra or something like that.
Nenefra, yep.
And that each person who sees it sees something different. So interesting little bits of information there. And all of that rang a bell. And when I had some time to think about it, I realized we had a scene in Warbreaker where Lightsong was examining paintings. That was like part of his duties as a god, was he's supposed to look at paintings and say what he thinks about them. And
yes.
so I'm like, okay, I remember this. So I went back, I went over to my bookshelf and I pulled off Warbreaker and I started doing some digging. And I found it, sure enough, the scene where he's examining a painting. And it's kind of one of those moments in the story of Warbreaker where he starts to take his job a little seriously. Before, up until this point, he's just been goofing off. I don't want to be a god. Who am I? What am I doing? Then he sees this one painting and it kind of speaks to him. But that painting that speaks to him is red with some black and with some white. And he sees some very specific things in there. He sees Nightblood in the painting. He sees war. He sees battle. And then it talks about how he like says, "Oh yeah, don't send this one to be burned." All the rest of his paintings, they like all get sent off to be burned. And he's like, "Oh no, don't burn this one." And all of that together has me very convinced that this is that painting. And somehow that painting has come from the world of Warbreaker into Shadesmar on Roshar and is just sitting in a market stall here in this random city that doesn't even seem that important. And I don't know what to do with this information. I'm really struggling about why this is important, and it may not be. This may just be an Easter egg, but I am really jazzed about this, that this is such a specific and detailed connection between the two books we've just read.
Could you, but before you talk, Paul, could you imagine if Shallan had been the one to walk into the city and gone to the stall instead of Kaladin?
I've seen
and
that
she
before.
sees the painting and she goes, "Huh, that looks familiar," and then walks away. That'd be so funny. But anyway, go ahead, Paul.
That would. I mean, that's what would happen if she were the one to walk into.
Oh,
there,
clearly.
Right.
Wait, but okay, I'm not even gonna elaborate on what Elliot said. I just want to ask you, Trevor, have you heard this? Did you know this was like a connection or an Easter egg? Because honestly, I think this is a very obscure connection that I think is short. Like it, evidence really points to it, but like it's obscure enough that I'm curious to see if you've even heard of this.
I have heard of it, and
Okay.
I mean,
Did you ever notice it on your own? Would you have noticed that?
did I ever notice it on my own? So I read Oathbringer first before Warbreaker.
Okay.
So
okay.
did I recognize it on that read? Absolutely not. When I read Warbreaker, I actually picked up on this when they titled the court of gods before he even looks at this painting. I tied those two together first.
Okay.
When the vendor guy says, "Oh, this comes from the court of gods," that's when I made that connection.
Okay, that makes sense. I had forgotten that like your order was different from us, right?
Right.
And stuff. So that makes sense. But that is quite the connection, Elliot, and I'm really impressed. Because I mean, I was just like, okay, cool, painting.
Yeah.
Moving on.
Yeah.
Nice. Oh wow. Okay, 9 figures. It's probably the Unmade or the Heralds or something. Whoa.
And now I'm getting really intrigued by the number of little crossover bits from that story to this one. I did not expect that at all. I figured we were reading. I figured we read Warbreaker for Nightblood,
Or Nightblood.
and that was it.
Right.
That was the only connection we were going to have here. It was, oh yeah, you're supposed to, or if you want to know a little more about Nightblood, go read Warbreaker. So the fact that these keep coming up and that we potentially have Vasher in our story, that we potentially have Vivenna in our story, here we have this detailed scene with the painting. These stories seem to be more connected than I would have guessed.
I agree, and especially, I guess when I first thought about it was with Rhino, our previous episode, who was like immediately jumping to breaths as the like the level of enlightenment or whatever the term was. Yeah, just like how I guess it's more commonplace. So I've been surprised.
Yeah. I want to talk about the economy or the I'm sort of looking for the monetary value of spheres in Shadesmar. In Shadesmar they don't value the sphere itself, they value Stormlight. So the price of this painting is 1,000 bromes of Stormlight. And on the physical realm, there are, sapphire, ruby, emerald, that they're all different tiers of a monetary value. But in Shadesmar, none of that matters. It's the Stormlight that's the value of the sphere. So it doesn't matter what color sphere you have in Shadesmar, the value is the light in it. So you could bring 1,000 bromes of whatever color Stormlight you want. It's just 1,000 bromes of Stormlight is the value there. So that's why some things seem to be super expensive and some things seem to be super cheap, is because they just have a lot of spheres of different varieties, but some of them are more or less valuable in Shadesmar.
Also, the actual value that the different items that are for sale have seems like almost arbitrary. There's really things that you would expect to be expensive. They talk about how they get like clothing or something for a shockingly low price. And then you go over and other things are just randomly, oh yeah, that's 5,000, marks worth of Stormlight. It's like, whoa, like wait, what? And the only explanation we get is something about like how permanent they are. And like that's all we get is like how permanent they are determines their value. Odd.
Yep. So their tour of Celebrant gets cut short because turns out there's a fused in Celebrant looking for them. He's doing these interrogations of all the ships coming into port, and he finds Captain Eco and sees like the food that they had on board for the passengers, and ends up burning his ship to the ground, kind of on accident, but because there's no water to put the ship out. And when all is said and done, Syl actually uses the bounty on her head of being an honor spren to get passage on a ship. So there's a super fancy ship with honor spren on it, and she basically takes off her disguise and says, "Hey, hi, like I'm Syl. I'm the ancient daughter," is what she is her title, and they recognize her immediately and turn around and pick her up because we're presuming because she's worth a lot.
This was definitely a bit of a revelation here. Syl has a bounty on her head. I mean, we knew that she was disobedient
Right.
before, right? We knew that she sought after Kaladin or chose to bond with Kaladin, and that was, not condoned. But this is a whole nother level. This is like all of Shadesmar is out to find her because there's a huge bounty on her head. Like, who is she? And then we get this cryptic title. Maybe that's the wrong word choice. Interesting title, Ancient Daughter. That sounds, potentially really important. Is Syl gonna end up being like the daughter of the king of all Shadesmar or something like that? I mean, we know she's tied to the Stormfather and that she's an honor spren, which is apparently kind of royalty already. But is Syl gonna end up being like someone super really important in Shadesmar?
She has a throwaway comment of, "Oh, I'm a spren light eyes, and I didn't tell you I didn't tell you Kaladin because I thought you wouldn't like me."
Yep.
That's really funny.
There's also a funny joke in here that I think is really well delivered in the audiobook, and it's pattern interpreting for pattern interpreting for Shallan to barter for passage, and he turns to interpret and says, "Oh, the captain would rather trade with honor spren than go back to the perpendicularity." And in the audiobook, Kate Redding has a wonderful delivery of this line because she's like, "Oh, I think this is a joke, ha ha ha," because that like pattern doesn't understand like humor or anything like that. So I don't know, she's really good at it.
I do actually want to touch on pattern for like just a second, because honestly, it's not worth like going down the rabbit trail. But we've known that pattern is a cryptic, right? And we I don't know, when we first were learning about him and learning about Shallan and their bond, we kind of referred to them as like lie spren. Like they feed off of like lies or truths, but I don't know. It's a weird like relationship there. But I mean, we kind of learned, I think it was actually in our previous episode. I don't remember exactly where we learned it, that you know, Syl is the spren of honor. Pattern is the spren of like logical or natural truth. Right? It's a big long phrase, like the fundamental properties in which our world exists on or whatever. And that's like what his pattern is a physical like or a display of that like like I don't know, literal like structure of what is true, of what is like of what literally makes the world kind of thing. So I thought that was just really fascinating to learn that. And so yeah, he's like a truth spren, I guess. So I thought that was neat. But yeah, he doesn't get humor very well. You're right.
The last thing I want to highlight in this chapter is the way they actually escape the fuse. The fuse doesn't come after them. Why?
I noticed this. The fused sees them board the ship, chases after them, and then stops when when the fuse sees that there's honor spread. It's like, and we've gotten those other mentions, like the whole "I'd rather trade with honor spread" thing. Honor spreads seem like feared or hated, or are they just more powerful than all the rest of the spren? There's something very different about honor spren, and all the rest of the spren treat them differently.
The docking broker guy also has an interesting reaction to Shallan confessing that she's a Knights Radiant. He's happy about it, and he says he'll cover for them as they run. Weren't we under the impression that Spren don't like people because of the Recreants? You know, like, wouldn't he be concerned that the Knights Radiant are coming back?
His one comment in there that might help with that was he says something along the lines of, "We've been waiting so long for men to regain their honor," or something like that, or for men to regain their oaths. And maybe he's just a little more optimistic amongst the spren and thinks that, oh yeah, maybe we can, get back to the way it used to be, whereas other spren might look at it as, oh great, another opportunity for humans to betray spren. But yeah, I was a little surprised too that he viewed that as a good turn of events.
Anything else on 102?
My only other thought on that is, didn't we learn that a spren is kind of strengthened through their bond with a human, right? So it helps both parties a lot.
Right. Assuming it's a healthy bond, it helps them both progress, right?
Yeah, that's true. So it's like, yeah, they a lot of spren probably hate humans because of the recreants, which very much makes sense. But there's still probably that innate desire, like, for that healthy bond to grow.
Right.
So